Hi, I'm Vicki Collett from the University of Arkansas. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a story of understanding about improving culturally responsive instruction through collaborative lesson study. This story illustrates that participation patterns vary among and within cultural groups, that when instruction includes patterns of participation that are culturally appropriate, learning increases, and that teachers' understandings change through opportunities for classroom observation and collaborative reflection. The process used for professional learning in this story is collaborative lesson study. Lesson study is a form of embedded professional development that empowers teachers to drive improvement and incorporate new ideas and methods into their teaching. The overarching goals of lesson study are to build pathways that enable continual growth of the knowledge, interpersonal resources, and motivation required to improve teaching and learning. These three things are key to improved instruction. Teacher motivation increases because during lesson study, teachers have increased agency and efficacy. Let me give you a little background about lesson study. Lesson study is bottom-up professional development that originated in Japanese elementary education. It was brought to the United States in 1998 by Catherine Lewis. It began with math instruction but has spread to other academic areas and has been used by both pre-service and in-service teachers, and has a track record of demonstrated improvement in student achievement. So what is lesson study? Lesson study is a structure for job-embedded professional development. During lesson study, teachers collaboratively plan lessons. The lessons become the focus of inquiry on effective teaching practices. Teachers observe the lesson they've planned and they collaboratively revise that plan. And feedback is perceived as an opportunity for instructional improvement rather than personal evaluation because the observed lesson was collaboratively designed. Research has shown that lesson study supports improvement adapted to local contexts, develops professional communities, increases teacher motivation and efficacy, and increases teachers' pedagogical and content knowledge. Collaborative lesson study supports the processes, uses protocols, creates safety, and asks questions to encourage rigorous inquiry. The lesson study story that I'm going to tell you takes place at a rural high school where the median annual family income is $25,000. The community is 70% Native American, predominantly Cherokee. This study asks, to what extent does lesson study support teachers' understanding of responsive instruction? And what aspects of lesson study support culturally responsive instruction? Also, what obstacles are presented to culturally responsive instruction? Just a reminder that since this is a video, if I'm going too fast, you can pause or review at your leisure. These are the participants for our study. We had teachers Liz, Tanya, and Cherie, and then Angie and myself as researchers. I'd invite you to note the ethnicity of participants, and all except for Cherie and myself have Native American ancestry, including Angie, one of the researchers. Also, I'd invite you to look at the years at this school. All of the teachers had spent their entire career and indeed their entire lives at this school and in this town. The data sources for this study include audio recordings and transcription of our meetings, email exchanges, including the attached documents and the photos, and online collaboration. Secondary data sources include field notes for meetings and classroom observations. This is the lesson study cycle. Begins with the yellow there, study, then we plan, observe, reflect, revise or revision the lesson, and then reteach. This study consisted of one cycle of lesson study that included 4 meetings over the course of 5 weeks. Teachers initially met with the researchers and the principal for an hour to learn about lesson study, and then 2 additional meetings were held during the teacher's 1-hour conference period to discuss areas of weakness in student learning and to collaborate on a lesson addressing the identified weakness, which was sentence structure and punctuation usage. Between the face-to-face meeting and the lesson observation day, additional communication on lesson design and content was conducted by email and shared with online documents. The 4th meeting lasted 4 hours and included a pre-observation discussion, observation while one of the teachers taught the lesson, and a debrief immediately afterward when teachers discussed what they'd seen and heard during the lesson. After planning but before observing, we completed this template where we thought through the lesson, including the student learning activities, how we anticipated the students and the teachers to respond, and then points for us to notice during the lesson. That right column drew our attention to how students were taking up the lesson that we had planned together. These instructions were on the board when students entered the classroom on the observation day. Students sat in groups of 3 at stations, and there was an envelope at each station with little strips of paper that had phrases that could be combined into cohesive sentences. And then students had 5 minutes at each station. They rotated among the stations. So here's what it looked like when they dumped their phrases out. You can see they were also provided with a list of conjunctions, since that was one of the focuses for this lesson. They ended up with sentences like these. So each station described a different part of a house. So they ended up with sentences like these after moving to all the stations. We asked, to what extent does lesson studies support teachers' culturally responsive instruction? The debrief provided the best evidence of lesson study impact. Teachers became more aware of students' comfort levels. Liz gives an explanation and tells a story about a student. I'm going to play you an audio clip, and I'm going to go to the participant table so that you can tell whose voices we're hearing. Just a little more background information. Liz, who does a lot of the talking in this audio clip, her husband is full-blood Cherokee, traditionally raised. So as you listen to this clip, I'm just going to point to the person who's speaking.
The Native American people, for the most part, you have your exceptions, very quiet. I did notice one thing, because you're a bubbly and happy person. When she went and approached, I pointed out to you, I believe, when you went and you were not loud, but louder tone than normal. He wasn't getting in trouble. You were, talking, and he got so uncomfortable. He pulled his hood up and put his hood on, left on the whole rest of the hour.
Wow.
It's just that comfort. And I told her, I said, that's just a, that was his, went into hiding.
When he went to talk.
Yeah, he went into hiding with that. I had a kid that changed into my class just the other day, and he had been with time. And when he changed into my class, he looked pretty much like a full-blood kid, very traditional. You can tell, very, of course, he was very kind of thuggish, acting and stuff. Skipped my class for the first several times, so I went and talked to him. Got in trouble, went to ISD, come back, and he said, why aren't you going? He's like, I don't understand what's going on. He said, well, talk to me, and it made me aware. And so I noticed I couldn't ask him stuff out loud, but when we would finish, I'd walk to his desk, squat down, very quietly say something, and he's just opened up to me, and he'll do anything for me. But you have to approach them different.
You can't even use them as an example in class and be like, and talking and sharing something. And you say, well, guys, well, just like a great, you don't point it. Like, I don't ever say, well, I had a great sentence today. You don't even acknowledge that they did well in front of their peers. Like, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, you can go and say, good job today, and shoot beings, but you don't, like, and I'm not saying, I'm like, you obviously don't ever call a student out, but, but to even say, you did such a good job in class, I just want, you don't give them recognition in public either like that.
So I hope that audio clip helped to illustrate some of the types of conversations that happened during our debrief conversation. Another finding was that teachers became more aware of students' modes of communication. In the second quote, the teacher is referring to Native American students' communication through eye movements and chin gestures, for example, when she says, and like you said about like the two Native kids, they got it. They could communicate in that way. But if you put them in a different group, then they're not going to have that opportunity, right? A final theme was implications for grouping and how they relate to culture. Teachers recognized how students respond to grouping, and they thought about how to group students. We also asked what aspects of lesson study support culturally responsive instruction. As you could tell from the recording, open discussion, especially during the debrief, really supported teacher learning. This discussion was not dominated by the facilitator and not mostly back and forth between the facilitator and a teacher. It was also evident from the examples I've shared that having observable data collected during the observation supported learning as teachers reflected. There were some obstacles to be overcome for this learning to occur. For example, there was some discomfort discussing culture and race. Another obstacle was that teachers sometimes positioned one member of the lesson study team in relation to self or other. For example, couching criticisms or recommendations in ways that really deflected away from the one who made the original comment or from the teacher who was observed. Another obstacle was the assumptions that teachers seem to hold about teaching as a matter of style or personal preference. Also, teachers showed how previous teaching practices and norms may constrain change. Despite these obstacles, teachers felt they gained some important takeaways. This is a chart that we constructed during the debrief. On the left side are things that teachers noticed during the lesson that they observed. And on the right side, why were those observations important? So one of the things they observed was that eye movements and slight gestures were used for communicating by students in a group that was made up of Native American students. Why this was important, they felt, was because they needed to remember to approach students not in a loud or confrontational way and not recognizing out loud in front of the whole group these students' accomplishments. Importantly, they noted that they should be asking the question, are students still learning? If they're communicating in nonverbal ways that are appropriate culturally for them, are they still learning? This was a question that they hadn't been asking before. They'd been expecting those normative verbal communication modes. Other things that they felt were important takeaways for them were about student needs for communication and comfort, and about how teachers should respond based on grouping and scaffolding. As I wrap up, I want to invite you to consider what aspects of collaborative lesson study seem most effective, and how might you potentially incorporate these aspects into your own work with pre-service or in-service teachers. And just stop and think for a moment, what was most useful for you about this story? The story illustrates that participation patterns vary among and within cultural groups, that when instruction includes patterns of participation that are culturally appropriate, learning increases, and that teachers' understandings change through opportunities for classroom observation and collaborative reflection. Thanks for letting me share this story of understanding about improving culturally responsive instruction through collaborative lesson study. To learn more or to connect with me, you can check out this article in Literacy Research and Instruction about our lesson study. Also, you can see how to connect with me via email on my website or in other social media. My book about collaborative lesson study is available from Teachers College Press if you want to know more. Thanks for taking the time to listen and learn with me.